Let's take a look at the historical details and mistakes from the in-engine trailer of Total War Three Kingdoms. We'll majorly focus on the equipment, however I won't judge whether the equipment on the heroes or the commanders was historical or not, because I think it might be a good idea if their equipment was based on the traditional illustration for the novel Romance of the Three Kingdoms. But I still believe the common unit should have historical equipment, especially consider there's already a large variety of weapons and armors from Han Dynasty and Three Kingdoms era, and the regular army from different regions of the empire used different tactics and equipment. Having historical equipment for the common unit could make the game more interesting. Let's start from the beginning of the trailer. Here we can see several soldiers patrolling holding a type of weapon called ji, or sometimes mentioned as the Chinese halberd. However, the shape of the weapon here isn't very accurate. The model is clearly based on the Bronze Age version of this type of weapon, which we can be found from the Spring and Northern era and the Warring State era archaeological sites. There were in fact combinations of two different weapons. First, the spears, and second, a type of weapon called ge, or dagger axe. However, the Han Dynasty and the Three Kingdoms era Chinese halberd were forged in one piece and the shape was very different, and they were majorly used by the cavalries instead of the infantry. In fact, ji was probably one of the most important melee weapons for the Chinese cavalries from Han Dynasty to Three Kingdoms era. Of course, because we don't have a closer look on the weapon, it might be just a modeling problem. The helmet worn by these soldiers are in fact a type of clothing called zeguan. This is a very common clothing for the soldiers in the Three Kingdoms era and the Han Dynasty. The type of armor he wears was called liangdangkai. It is a type of very simple laminar armor that only covers the front and the back of the body. It can still provide enough protection against incoming arrows and thrusting polearms, but in close-quarter melee combat it can be very vulnerable because the side of the body was totally unprotected against enemy attack. Liangdangkai was very common from the late Three Kingdoms era to the Northern and Southern dynasties. In here we can also see several spearmen. However, the shape of the spearhead of the spears they are using isn't very accurate. The Three Kingdoms era and Han Dynasty spearheads are somewhat narrower and much longer. Archaeologists usually call them sword-shaped spearhead. I think the spearhead here is either based on the spear that's long after the Three Kingdoms era or long before the Three Kingdoms era and Han Dynasty during the Bronze Age, when Chinese were using a type of spearhead that's much shorter and wider, which archaeologists sometimes call them as the leaf-shaped spearhead. Or maybe CA simply used the model of European spear from previous Total War games, because right now, the Total War Three Kingdoms is still far from complete.
Yuan Shao, my friend, leader of...
You can see Yuan Shao and Cao Cao playing in a game of Go, or Weiqing in Chinese. The English translation of the name of the game was translated from the Japanese translation of the name of the game, which is Yigo. And here they are actually following an ancient rule for the Go game, which is before the game starts, each player will put 2 gold pieces on the opposite Xin position, which is a position near the corner of the Go board. These 4 gold pieces are called 坐子. Only after these 4 pieces are put on the position, the game can start. This is a rule we no longer see in modern Go games, and I think it's a very interesting historical detail in the trailer that many people probably wouldn't notice. The armor of Yuan Shao from this part is based on the Mingguangkai armor. Many people think it is the most symbolic armor from the Tang Dynasty, but it was already appeared in the late Han Dynasty and the Three Kingdoms era, according to the written records from these 2 eras. However, the earliest archaeological evidence that can show us how this type of armor looks, which are the statues, paintings, and pieces from the armor, came from the Northern and Southern dynasties, which is shortly after the Three Kingdoms and Jin Dynasty era. This type of armor has 2 large metal plates covering the chest, and they're usually well polished. Under the sunlight, they can reflect bright light, and that's the reason it was called 明光铠, the bright light armor. And by the way, the common laminar armor in this era will usually be called dark armor or the black steel armor. In the later version of the 明光铠, they will have 2 additional mirror armor on the chest. The one we see here is probably based on the earlier version, the simpler version of 明光铠, possibly based on the statues or paintings from northern and southern dynasties. The helmet of Yuan Shao was based on earlier Chinese lamellar helmet, or 铁胄, and despite all these modern artistic design added on the helmet, it still looks pretty accurate. So even though I said I feel it is okay if the heroes in the game got not so historical equipment, I'm still happy to see Yuan Shao in the game got fairly historical and accurate equipment. In this part, we can see a soldier stabbing a civilian using the type of polearm. Some people think this type of polearm was called 朴刀. Well, first, the right pronunciation for this word should be 朴刀 instead of 朴刀. And 朴刀is a type of Song Dynasty weapon that's around 800 years after the Three Kingdoms era. In Han Dynasty or Three Kingdoms era, similar type of polearm was called Dadao instead of 朴刀. Dadao wasn't very common in Han Dynasty or Three Kingdoms era regular army. Only a small number of them was stored in the government-owned arsenal during the Three Kingdoms era or Han Dynasty. Dadao was sometimes used by the bodyguards of the commanders during the Three Kingdoms era and Han Dynasty. In this part, we can see several cavalries using spear as weapons. In fact, comparing to the infantry spears in the previous scene, this is a better example how short and bulky the spearheads are. In the trailer, comparing to the historical Han Dynasty and the Three Kingdoms era spearheads. Again, these might be just recycled models from previous Total War games. And by the way, the most notable type of spear or lance used by the Chinese cavalries in the Three Kingdoms era or Han Dynasty was called shuo, or shao. It is a type of very heavy lance that's usually around 4 meters long. It's kind of comparable to the Iranian kontos. They were developed in a similar era, and they were both used by the early shock cavalries and cataphracts. Here we can see a swordsman use a type of shield called 双虎盾. In the trailer, the shield is only slightly larger than some of the bucklers. There were indeed many small lacquered 双虎盾 found in the Han Dynasty tombs, but archaeologists believe they were majorly used for ceremonial or decorational purpose. The combat version of 双虎盾 was much larger. They are at least medium-sized shield. If they really want to have a sword and buckler unit, I think a much better choice would be to give them a type of shield called 钩香. It is a very interesting and common shield in Han Dynasty and Three Kingdoms era, but was rarely mentioned in the books published in the West. It is basically a type of metal bucklers from Han Dynasty, but it has a very large metal hook on the top of the shield and another on the bottom of the shield. Those hooks were designed to grab enemy weapons or shield, and according to the Han Dynasty document, 钩香 was very effective against polearms that has a so-called horizontal branch, for example halberd, or the Han Dynasty battle axe. 钩香 was not a type of shield used by the regular armies. You can barely find any of them stored in the government-owned arsenal of Han Dynasty, according to the Han Dynasty documents. However, it was very popular among the mercenaries, irregulars, and the bodyguards of the merchants and landlords, because though they cannot provide much protection, they are very easy to carry. And comparing to other types of bucklers, 钩香 could provide slightly better chance of winning when the buckler and swordsman were fighting against warriors that was using polearms. In this part, we can see a type of round shield being used by the soldiers. However, there are not many written records or archaeological evidence to support that the round shield was used by the regular army in Han Dynasty or Three Kingdoms era in large number. The only common round shield at the time in China was the rattan shield used by the native tribes in the south. Of course, they also fought for the Han Dynasty Imperial Army or the Three Kingdoms era warlords as either auxiliaries or mercenaries. The rattan shield, though sounds like a type of very cheap and lightweight shield, was in fact very heavy and durable. The process of making the rattan shield requires hardening them using the tune oil, and after the hardening process, the shield usually became somewhat heavier than the wooden shield. The rattan shield became the standard equipment for the Chinese warriors in the Ming Dynasty and Qing Dynasty, because at these two dynasties, gunpowder weapon became very popular, and the reinforced rattan shield was capable of blocking the shots from early arquebus and hand cannons at medium to long range. This is also an example how durable they could be if properly hardened. The soldiers in this part are wearing pretty accurate and standard Han Dynasty or Three Kingdoms era armor, but without the shoulder part or the armored sleeve. In fact, most of the Han Dynasty and Three Kingdoms era armor do covers the side of the body, unlike what showed in the earlier part of the trailer.
So I will banish this chaos.
The shields here might still be based on the Shuanghu. Though most of the Shuanghu are medium-sized, there were a larger version of them. The largest one of them are around 1.1 to 1.3 meters long. But the shield here looks more similar to a type of shield called Li Pai. Literally means standing shield. It is a type of shield carried by the archers or the crossbowmen to set up simple defensive walls on the battlefield. As for the melee infantries, from Han Dynasty, while in fact from the Warring States era to the Three Kingdoms era, larger shields were preferred by the armies in the South China. And the shield they use looks kinda like the Roman shield. The army in the north usually prefers smaller but lighter Shuanghu, and a type of arm strap shield which allowed them to use longer heavy polearms with both hands. In this part we can see multiple cavalries charging using sword and shield. While this combination isn't totally unhistorical, but it's definitely a very uncommon combination. The Chinese cavalries in Han Dynasty or Three Kingdoms era usually only use swords as sidearms, and there's almost no evidence to prove that shield was used by the cavalries in China in Han Dynasty or Three Kingdoms era, especially the round shield. As I said, this is a type of shield used by the native warriors in South China during the Three Kingdoms era. The melee cavalries in Han Dynasty or Three Kingdoms era usually use polearms as their primary weapon, and in fact, the majority of the cavalries in Han Dynasty or Three Kingdoms era are cavalries using composite bows or crossbows. A trebuchet can be seen in the background. Trebuchets were in fact a type of very common siege weapon in ancient China. Of course, the most common type of them are the traction trebuchet instead of the counterweight trebuchet showed in the video. And if the battle showed here is the Battle of Guandu, which is a decisive battle between Cao Cao and Yuan Shao, it might be more interesting if the siege weapon showed in the background is an onager instead of a trebuchet, because according to the record of the battle, a type of weapon called Piliche was used by the army of Cao Cao, which was a type of onager. And this is one of the most notable records of the use of onager in early Chinese history, and it's probably the earliest one. But of course, the trebuchet showed in the background is totally fine. This is just my suggestion.
This kingdom will be brought to order.
The Go game here is actually based on the match between two famous Qing Dynasty Go players, Fan Xiping and Liang Weijing. Here's a picture for comparison, and you can see they're basically the same. Fan Xiping, who plays the black side, started with what seems to be a series of minor tactical failures in the middle of the board, but he ends up achieving a strategic victory. Encircled most of the areas on the board. In the trailer, the black gold pieces are played by Cao Cao. So in this trailer, we can see Xie definitely did a good amount of research before making this trailer. Some of the historical details and the accuracy of some of the armor actually surprised me. but they still made a lot of historical mistakes, especially about the weapons and the shield. The historical accuracy of this trailer is okay, but still needs a lot of improvement. I hope when the game finally released, these mistakes could be changed in the game. Check out my other videos if you want to know more about the military history during this era. Thank you for your support and see you in the next video.